So I've been struggling a bit this week. Don't worry, it's not in a personal sense. But for the first time in ages, I had writer's block. I love showcasing stories and how the railways inspire us at Christmas, but I was running out of stories. That was until I was passing through Keighley. Their heritage station is parallel to the main line, and as I watched with both envy and wonder at its steam engine that were parked there, it struck me. And yes, I did shout, "I'm an idiot," before hiding behind my computer to the annoyed and startled stares of the passengers. Edith Nesbit was born to a chemist in 1858, but thanks to the ill health of her sister Mary, the family travelled around Europe in the hope that the fresh air and the warmer climate would be more agreeable to her. Sadly, Mary passed when Edith was 13, leaving the family devastated, and with no option, the family moved back to England, settling at Halstead Hall. The family didn't stay long and moved and settled in London. It was around her 19th birthday that Edith met Hubert Bland. Hubert was an author and a banker. He had planned to join the military, but the money to attend the Royal Academy was unavailable. He was much older than her, and he charmed her off her feet. When Edith fell pregnant, they decided to marry in 1880. Unusually, they decided to only live together part-time. At the same time, some other woman living with Hubert's mother, who at the time thought she was Hubert's fiancée, bore him a child. Despite this, both husband and wife had 3 children together. In 1886, Edith opened up her home to her friend Alice Hoaxson. Alice was pregnant out of wedlock, and Edith agreed to look after them. After the child was born, Edith adopted her as her own and named her Rosamond. However, Edith found out that Rosamond's father was her own husband. Edith was furious and threatened to throw both mother and daughter out on the street. It was only after Hubert threatened to leave himself did Edith relent. So Alice remained and had a second child, John. John was also adopted by Edith and lived with Edith's 3 other children, that being Mary, Paul and Fabian. Apart from the blatant adultery, the couple had similar tastes and ideas. From the age of 13, Edith loved writing and had penned many poems and started to dabble into stories. Unlike many other children's writers, her stories were not fantasy-driven, and she was considered the first true modern children's writer, and inspired by the scenery in her home area and the visits to Grove Park Station. One of her true greats was The Railway Children. The Railway Children follows the lives of 3 young children, Roberta or Bobby, Peter and Phyllis. The children live a comfortable middle-class family life in London and had the finer things such as Peter's toy train and a servant and a cook. They had everything they wanted and were well off as children went. The children's father worked at the Foreign Office, but one night their world was turned upside down when 2 men turned up on the family's doorstep. The children's father was instructed to go with them, and soon the children and their mother were left alone with barely anything to their name and destitute. Having no means to get by, the children were forced to move from the comfort of their London home to a small cottage in the countryside called 3 Chimneys. The house is near to a railway line, and the children took pleasure in watching the trains pass. One train in particular was the Green Dragon. The Green Dragon was the train that an old gentleman would regularly take. The children, assuming this train was going to where their father was, started to wave at this train daily. And this is where their adventures truly began. The children live and learn the complexities of being poor and what it means for them. They have also found comfort in the thought that their love is being taken by the railway to their father. There are several coming-of-age stories, especially around Roberta. Being the eldest, she takes on the role as main caretaker of the children and their mother when she becomes ill, but this leadership role can cause friction between her and Peter, being the man of the house. This is mostly evident in the book when the trio saw a barge on the nearby canal on fire with a baby and a dog inside. The parents of the child was at a local inn, and the children, knowing that they were too far away, raced to help the child. In their haste, Peter fell in and was rescued by the girls. Roberta and Peter jostled to get into the barge, Roberta protecting her brother while Peter thought he had an advantage due to him being soaked. Peter eventually found the baby while Roberta grabbed the dog, saving the day. On the day of the landslide, it was Peter that suggested the petticoats while Roberta was to stand bravely on the tracks in front of the train before fainting when the train stopped meters from her. Roberta would eventually learn what happened to her father through an old newspaper article and confronted her mother to the truth. She takes the news as her burden to bear and keeps the secret away from the others, but it does prompt her to write a letter which would ultimately lead to her father's release. Peter is the second eldest of the 3 children and is clearly seen as the man of the family. It was on his 10th birthday that the story really started. He was given a toy train which broke shortly after he played with it. Peter is strong-willed like Roberta, but can have a cheeky side to him as well, showing his lack of maturity. Almost overnight, as soon as the children move into the 3 chimneys, he's drawn to the railway and is one of the first to learn the train types, names and timetables. His cheekiness though often lands him in trouble when he was caught one night pilfering coal from the station coal heap. Amused by the mining excuse Peter gives him and taking pity on the lad, the station master lets him go. Peter can be rather courageous and quick thinking. When the 3 children rescued a young boy in the railway tunnel, it was him that guided the others to a bolt-hole recess so the train could safely pass them, and during the landslip, he was the one who suggested somewhat red to alert the train and knew that the train was expected. Peter is also rather intelligent with facts and figures and seemed to be fascinated by technology, especially engineering, and appears to enjoy collecting things, including engine numbers. Phyllis is the youngest child and the baby of the group. She's more timid than the other 2 and will often look to Roberta for guidance. She's also the more gullible of the 3, and Peter can sometimes take advantage of this, much to Roberta's disdain. However, she's never left out and always welcome along on adventures. Despite her younger age, Phyllis is very outspoken and will try to copy her older siblings, even though she's often corrected. When the children helped the boy in the tunnel, they went to the signal box to find the signalman asleep. They woke him, and the signaller, knowing his mistake and the danger the next train was in, was able to direct the train correctly before crying from shock in a crumpled heap. Phyllis was the one who gave him comfort and ultimately forgave him when he tried to pay the kids for the silence, showing a larger sense of compassion than the other 2, who judged the signalman for his attitude. Mother is a character on 2 fronts. Firstly, in and front of her children, she's optimistic, happy and full of smiles. She turns the situation into a game and makes it a fun experience. Like any mother would, she shields her children from the truth. But as time goes, the mask begins to slip and the children begin to notice. After father is sent away, mother devotes her time to writing, and in the book she celebrates the selling of some of her stories by giving the children treats such as buns and jam. She appears to be a highly educated author as well as a great linguist knowing several languages. Mother can come across as a proud woman, but also a woman who knows social status, standings in society and associations. When she became sick and the children asked the old gentleman for medicine, she scolded the children severely when the gentleman came to their aid. We also know her husband's affairs were in the paper, so it can be assumed she was either shunned by society and anyone associated or helping with them could face the same, or that she's in hiding, and any form of attention to who they were could alert those looking for her to find their whereabouts. I think it's the former. When the old gentleman turned up at the house, while being gracious and kind, mother told him he must not return. The gentleman seemed to agree to the terms and thanked her for her hospitality. The second front we see is the broken woman. We see that on occasion she is pale, sickly, overworked and depressed. The few times they intermingle is when she feels her children have overstepped her boundaries in asking for help, and when Roberta confronts her about reading her father's situation. Even in that situation, mother explains in a manner that Roberta is able to understand. Although her real name is never mentioned, she's a kind, thoughtful woman who cares deeply about her family and would do anything to protect them. Then there's the old gentleman. This is the gentleman, finely dressed, who takes the 9:15. At first, he's a novelty, waving back at the children as they wave to the train. But when Mother becomes ill, they approach him asking him for medicine. From then on, their stories become intertwined. Once again, his name is not mentioned in the stories or the books, but he does play a crucial role. He was there when the children received their pocket watches for saving the train, and he was the one who presented them. We can assume that as the graving was from the directors of the railway, he was possibly one of them too. Roberta took the opportunity after the ceremony to speak to him and uncovered that a Russian passenger that they had rescued and was recovering with their mother at home was a famous author looking for his family after fleeing Russia. The gentleman not only found this family, but helped look after them. In a twist of fate, the children brought home a boy with an injured leg, and the gentleman was the boy's own grandfather. It further transpired that the old gentleman had not only paid Mother for the boy's care, but Roberta had written to him about her father's plight, and he had agreed to look into it, believing her father innocent as well. The old gentleman was never given a name in the books, although the children were told formally of it. But from a letter, we know his initials were G.P. And there's nothing much to go on personality-wise, but we do know he was wealthy and kind. It was also credible he had friends in upper societies, as he was not only to be able to find the Russian gentleman's family, but he was also able to uncover the truth about father. The Russian passenger also features heavily in the story. Found tired, cold and ill in the station waiting room, no one could decipher who he was and where he was headed. Peter's stamp collection came in handy as the gentleman pointed to one with a Russian postmark, and the children rejoiced that he also spoke French. Luckily, Mother, who was nearby, was able to speak French, and after hearing his name, urged the children to bring him home. Mr. Skabansky was an author that had been imprisoned and then exiled due to his works. After realizing his family was in danger, he sent his family to England for safety with him to follow. Once he arrived, he grew very sick, and with very few people able to understand him, he'd gotten on the wrong train and ended up at the station when he was removed for not having a valid ticket. Over time, he recovered, and after the watch presentation ceremony, Roberta told the old gentleman of the Russian's predicament. After hearing his name, the old gentleman made it his mission to find the family. A few weeks later, he announced the news in person that the family had been found safe and well, and the family were reunited shortly afterwards. And the last main character is Perks. Perks is the porter of the station and the one to really introduce them to railway life. He lives, breathes and speaks railway, and is keen to show the children how the station is run. Perks lives a simple life and is not keen on frills, and his job was everything, even going as far as delivering a hamper to the children for no additional cost and after hours. He knew the family was poor and adjusting to life, so he helped where he could. He has a slight jealous streak and a thirst to be in the know, and was rather affronted when the Russian had come and the children had not been to see him at the station. Plus, he had to learn about the Russian through the paper. But he forgave the children as they talked, and after the 3:15 passed, he treated them to strawberries from the garden. One day, the children were most upset when Perks told him that he doesn't celebrate his birthday. So the children decided to help him celebrate it. In addition to the surprise, they asked around the village if they could be able to donate gifts for his birthday. On the 15th, the children put their plan into action, but they forgot to put the labels on the presents as they delivered them to Mr. Perks. Mr. Perks' pride gets in the way and assumes that all the presents were from them. When the children explain that they've collected them from the people of the village, Mr. Perks' pride turns into shame as he sees it that the village sees them as poorer than most. Shamed, even though he does acknowledge the children didn't do it out of malice, he decided he would rather not acquaint themselves further. Urged by a crying Mrs. Perks, Roberta reads the labels anyway. After reading all the good things the neighbours have said and nothing was done out of charity, Mr. Perks takes back everything he says and invites them all to tea. Although there's an underlying story arc, the story of the barge fire, the story of the landslide and the paper chase can still hold itself as individual stories in their own right, and in fact they were released in series form in the London Magazine. The stories were great as it had enough in the chapter to hold itself as a short story, but enough mystery in the background to keep the reader wanting more. It was released in part in 1905 when the series was complete. The book was released shortly afterwards. It wasn't long though before the book was adapted. It was scheduled to be used in a 5-part serial drama for the BBC radio programme Children's Hour in 1940. It was highly popular and took up the coveted 5 p.m. slot. In 1951 it was adapted again, this time for TV, and the BBC would schedule 8 episodes of around 30 minutes. There was a second adaptation which reused some of the footage. It had the same total runtime, around 4 hours, but it was separated into 4 hour-long specials rather than 8. But the BBC wanted to do better and produced not 1 but 2 further adaptations, one in 1957 and one in 1968. And it was this 1968 adaptation that caught the attention of Lionel Jeffries. After the latest adaptation was done, Lionel decided to purchase the rights from the BBC with a view to producing a film. It would be his directorial debut, having worked on set as an actor for many years. He brought in several rising stars including Bernard Cribbins, Sally Thompson and Gary Warren, as well as hiring some of the 1968 cast including Jenny Agutter, who revises her role as Roberta from the TV series. Interestingly, the child actors were not children at all. Jenny was 17, Gary Warren, who played Peter, was 16, and Sally Thompson, who was hired as 11-year-old Phyllis, was in fact the eldest at 20. Sally was forbidden to reveal her true age and banned her from smoking and drinking on set. But setting the scene would be difficult. In the late 60s, the ban on steam made the shoot impossible, and British Railways would not look too kindly if parts of its infrastructure was closed to filming. The shoot needed a secluded part of track that was cut off from the network, but still being managed and run so that steam could be used. It had to be in the country for the storyline to work, and it had to have an old-time station, and most importantly, it had to have a tunnel. The answer lay in the very few heritage railways that were open, and only one had the tunnel that they needed. The Keighley and Worth Valley Railway was a branch line serving small villages and hamlets before its terminus at Oxenhope. It was funded by wealthy mill owners in the area. In 1962, it was axed in the cuts. However, the line was saved from being totally destroyed by a preservation society, which bought it outright when access to Keighley Station. It opened as a heritage line in 1968, and more importantly, it had everything the film would require, including 4 ready-to-roll steam engines hand-picked for their starring roles. These were MSC 67, a 060 Huswell Clark tank engine, a Panier GWR 5700 class, number 5775, a Lancashire and Yorkshire tender engine, class 25, number 52044, and finally the Great Northern Railway class N2, number 4744. A whole range of different rolling stock was available too, all available from the Worth Valley for the film's disposal. Nearly everything was filmed on site. Oakworth was the main station, the tunnel near Haworth was temporarily extended and used for the paper chase scene, the Doctor's was the old Bronte parsonage in the village, and the Lansip scene was filmed in one of the cuttings. The film was an instant success and critically acclaimed. It has appeared many times in various lists of all-acclaimed films alongside Ghostbusters and Back to the Future. The film prompted a stage show which has been held in various places, including the Railway Museum, with one of the largest props to be ever used on stage, a real engine. The film was once again thrust into the spotlight with The Railway Children Return, a sequel to the original. Jenny was once again reprises her role as Roberta, but this time it's her turn to play mother, and this time along with her own children and grandchild, they're taking in evacuees from the Second World War. Once again, Keighley played host to the filming with a fresh wave of locomotives. The film received mixed reviews, with many referring it to a similar format and charm of the original. In all, Edith Nesbit wrote around 60 books and collective works. She passed the mantle to several other authors, including several other children, and many writers including C.S. Lewis and P.L. Travers would accolade her characters in their own works. Her husband passed in 1914, and she remarried 3 years later to a man called Thomas Tucker. Edith continued to work on her writings right up until her passing in 1924. It was suspected she had lung cancer, as her smoking addiction was, according to some, out of control. Although The Railway Children was one of her most famous works, Edith wrote several famous stories, including 5 Children in It and The Phoenix and the Carpet. Many other stories have been adapted, and even today it's inspiring others. I was lucky enough to see some of the original engines and props from the movie at Keighley, and even sit in the carriages that the movie used. The best part is that the museum and the carriage works come free with an all-rounder ticket. I was looking to be taken around the engine sheds and got to see some of the other engines that were not on display. The tours are only available on certain days, usually gala days, so it's worth checking, but the line as a whole is great, and honestly parts of it and the station, it's just like the movie.